3 years ago, a high school girl named Marina was kidnapped and imprisoned by 3 teenage boys. They subjected her to unimaginable abuse, which ultimately led to her falling to her death. But because all 3 attackers were minors at the time, none of them received the punishment they truly deserved. The ringleader was sentenced to only 3 years in prison, while one of the accomplices secured his freedom by paying a large settlement to Marina's family. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye, while Marina's loved ones were still grieving her loss. The ringleader had already completed his sentence and been released from prison. He even shamelessly showed up at an entertainment district as if nothing had happened. The very next day, he had the audacity to visit Marina's home and pretend to ask her family for forgiveness. The story begins when Takumi transfers into the class of the teenage detective Hajime, handsome, wealthy, and an international student. Takumi quickly became the center of everyone's attention. Just as Hajime looked at Takumi with envy, Inspector Isamu suddenly arrived at the school. He called Hajime up to the rooftop and asked him about the new transfer student, Takumi. Isamu warned Hajime to keep a close eye on him, but before Hajime could ask any more questions, Isamu hurriedly left the school. After leaving the school, Isamu went to a house and rang the doorbell. He was there to visit Irina, Marina's younger sister. Isamu had been the lead investigator on Marina's case 3 years earlier. Because the 3 offenders had escaped true justice, Isamu had carried an overwhelming sense of guilt ever since. That was why he often visited Marina's family. Today marked the 3rd anniversary of Marina's death. As usual, he came to check on how Irina had been doing. Over the past 3 years, Marina's family had slowly begun to rebuild their lives. Marina's former boyfriend had also recently become a detective. Just then, 2 unexpected visitors arrived at Irina's home. They were attorney Komori and Yohei, one of the men responsible for Marina's death. 3 years earlier, after Marina died, her father filed a civil lawsuit against all 3 offenders. The ringleader, Riku, was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Takumi, one of the accomplices, reached a financial settlement with Marina's father. That left only Yohei, who had never been forgiven. So Komori brought Yohei to see Irina, hoping she would forgive him because he supposedly had changed. Irina refused, claiming her father wasn't home, and slammed the door in their faces without hesitation. She had every reason to do so. Just a few days earlier, Irina had seen Yohei picking up women at an entertainment district with her own eyes. There was no way someone like him had truly changed. His so-called apology was nothing more than an attempt to reduce the amount of compensation he had to pay. Irina collapsed onto the floor and burst into tears. Isamu watched everything unfold, yet there was nothing he could do, because he was a police officer. 3 years earlier, Marina's body had been discovered buried beneath an open field on the outskirts of town. The 3 suspects were quickly arrested, but since they were all minors, only the ringleader, Riku, was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Later, Isamu went to a nearby cafe to meet someone. That person was Riku, the ringleader who had just been released from prison. At that moment, Riku was casually playing a game on his phone. Isamu had hoped that 3 years behind bars would have changed him, even if only a little, but he was wrong. Riku had come for one reason only, to tell Isamu that every word of remorse he had shown 3 years earlier had been a lie. As long as it kept him out of prison, he was willing to say anything. At that moment, Isamu shot to his feet and glared at Riku in fury. It looked as though he was only a second away from putting the bastard down himself. But he was a police officer, and there was nothing he could do. All he could do was watch as Riku walked away. That night, Riku was shot while walking home. The gunman aimed directly at his head and pulled the trigger. Fortunately, Riku survived. The bullet only grazed his ear, leaving behind a bloody wound. The police quickly arrived at the scene and recovered the handgun. It was immediately sent in for forensic analysis. When the test results came back, everyone at the scene was stunned. The weapon turned out to be Inspector Isamu's service pistol. Meanwhile, Hajime received a call from Chief Inspector Kengo. Isamu had disappeared. Worse still, he had become the prime suspect in the shooting. Kengo took Hajime to Riku's hospital room to question him about what had happened. Riku insisted that Isamu was the one who had attacked him, but when Kengo asked whether he had actually seen the shooter's face, Riku admitted it had been too dark to tell. That meant Isamu wasn't necessarily the gunman. Riku, now visibly shaken, even suspected that Takumi and Yohei had already been targeted as well. He immediately called both of them. Neither of them answered. Early the next morning, a hotel employee discovered Yohei's body inside a guest room bathtub. He had drowned to death. His hands and feet had been tightly bound, and his mouth had been sealed shut with tape. Helpless, he could only watch as water from the faucet slowly rose over his nose and mouth. In the end, Yohei was slowly drowned alive in unimaginable fear and agony. The crime scene was horrifying. It was obvious that the killer hated him enough to make him suffer before he died. Security footage captured a blurry figure. The killer was wearing a long coat and a hat. The person's build closely resembled Isamu's. The last phone call on Yohei's phone had come from Riku at 7 o'clock that morning. The medical examiner estimated that Yohei had died sometime between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. That meant Riku's phone call had most likely been made while the murder was taking place. One victim had survived an attempted murder. Another had died in a bathtub. The killer's targets couldn't have been more obvious. The three remorseless juvenile offenders from 3 years ago. Now, only Takumi remained unharmed. Hajime warned Takumi to stay on his guard, but Takumi brushed the warning aside. He confidently told Hajime that his family had already hired bodyguards to protect him. Attorney Komori was also escorting him everywhere every day. He didn't believe anything would happen to him. After that, Hajime visited the families of several people connected to the case. The first was Kazue, Inspector Isamu's wife. She told Hajime that years ago, Isamu had taught Marina kendo and cared deeply about her as one of his students, so when he learned of Marina's death, he was devastated. The second person Hajime visited was Reiji, Marina's fiancé. The two had promised to get married as soon as they graduated, but just before their wedding, Marina suddenly sent him a text message ending their relationship. When Reiji called Marina's family, he discovered that she had gone missing the day before. A month later, he received the heartbreaking news that Marina was dead. The third person Hajime spoke with was Attorney Komori. He brought out the case files from 3 years earlier. The three boys had subjected Marina to brutal torture, including burning, water torture, and even attempted strangulation. In the end, Marina fell to her death while struggling to escape. But even if she hadn't fallen, she would have died within a week because of the severe abuse she had endured. Meanwhile, Riku received another threatening text message at the hospital. Convinced that the police and Isamu were working together, he fled the hospital without hesitation. At the same time, Takumi's chauffeur-driven car had just come to a stop after school. Without warning, a massive explosion erupted beneath it. Takumi was killed instantly. Attorney Komori survived the blast, but suffered serious injuries. Near the blast site, the police discovered a remote control hidden in the bushes. After examining it, they found Isamu's fingerprints on the device, but Hajime felt that everything about it seemed far too deliberate. There was no way the killer would be careless enough to leave the murder weapon behind. Besides, the fingerprints on the remote didn't make sense. Although fingerprints from all 5 fingers were present, there wasn't a single palm print on the device. Even stranger, the joystick on the remote had no fingerprints at all. So how had it been operated? Just then, an emergency call came in. On the other end was Riku, his voice trembling with fear. He claimed that a man wearing a hat and a mask was chasing him. Before he could say anything else, the call was cut off after the sound of a violent struggle. Hajime and Kengo immediately traced the phone signal. It led them to a nearby building. They rushed there without delay. The moment they burst into the room, the scene before them left everyone in shock. It was a completely sealed locked room. The door had been blocked from the inside by a heavy sofa. In the middle of the room, Riku was hanging from a rope. His hands were tied behind his back, and his feet dangled about a foot above the floor. Everyone rushed to cut him down. Fortunately, they arrived just in time and managed to save his life. But then they noticed a man standing nearby, looking completely confused. He was wearing sunglasses and a face mask. That man was none other than the long-missing Inspector Isamu. Inside the locked room, there were only 2 people, Isamu and the nearly dead Riku. There was no sign of anyone else. That made Isamu the prime suspect. With a grim expression, Kengo placed him under arrest. At the hospital, Isamu tried to recall everything that had happened over the past 2 days. He only remembered parting ways with Riku at the park. After that, everything became a blur. When he regained consciousness, he found himself inside that locked room. Hajime returned to the hotel room where Yohei had died. He carefully searched the scene again and again, looking for any clue he might have missed. Just as he found himself completely stumped, his phone suddenly rang. The caller was Miyuki. As Hajime stared at his vibrating phone, a sudden flash of inspiration struck him. But when he shared his theory with Kengo, Kengo pointed out that Komori, Irina, and Reiji all had solid alibis. So who was the real killer? Still searching for the answer, Hajime returned to the locked room where Riku had been found. He listened to the phone recording one more time. Then everything finally clicked. The killer turned out to be the last person anyone would have expected. Now Hajime only needed to solve one final mystery to uncover the entire truth. He crouched down and carefully examined the room. It was completely empty. There wasn't a single chair, box, or any other object that could have been used to stand on before hanging, so how had Riku managed to hang himself? Unless whatever he had stood on had been removed afterward. Hajime's eyes fell on the carpet in the center of the room. He walked over and slowly rolled it up. As the carpet curled into a thick roll, he was surprised to discover that its height was exactly 30 centimeters. Hajime immediately rushed back to the hospital. He was determined to expose the truth in front of everyone, but the moment he arrived, he saw Riku, who was supposed to be resting in his hospital bed, fighting with Isamu. Riku claimed that Isamu had come to silence him, but Hajime quickly exposed his lie. The two of them had been arguing outside Isamu's hospital room. It was obvious that Riku had started the confrontation. Hajime then solemnly declared that the person responsible for all of these murders was Riku. That day at the park, Riku had rendered Isamu unconscious with drugs and carried him into the room. He then used Isamu's service pistol to shoot himself in the ear and shoulder. Everything had been carefully staged to frame the completely innocent Isamu. Yohei's murder was an even more ingenious scheme. Hajime then led everyone into the bathroom. He took out a cell phone and tied a thin string around it. When an incoming call caused the phone to vibrate, the vibration triggered a mechanism that lowered the bathtub drain plug and sealed the drain. Riku never needed to be at the scene. With nothing more than a single phone call, he remotely carried out the cruelest form of water torture. The surveillance footage everyone had seen of Isamu threatening Yohei had also been carefully staged by Riku in disguise. Takumi's death was planned in advance as well. Riku had hidden gasoline and a timed ignition device beneath Takumi's car. Once Takumi got into the vehicle, Riku used the remote control to ignite the gasoline. Afterward, he deliberately left the remote, which had Isamu's fingerprints on it. At the scene, the most dangerous part of the entire plan was Riku's staged hanging. He used his body to push the sofa against the door, creating the illusion that the room had been sealed from the inside. He then stood on the rolled-up carpet in the center of the room. From that height, the rope could just barely reach the hook on the ceiling. He slipped the noose around his neck and handcuffed his own hands behind his back. Then he forcefully kicked the rolled-up carpet out from under himself. The carpet immediately unrolled and returned to its original position. Riku was left hanging in midair, creating the illusion that someone had tried to murder him. He had even calculated the timing perfectly. The police would arrive and rescue him just before he suffocated to death. It was an enormous gamble. He had wagered his own life for a chance to erase all suspicion from himself. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Riku finally gave up resisting, but what he said next left everyone in the room heartbroken. The truth was, he had never been the one who killed Marina. He had taken the fall for Yohei and Takumi 3 years earlier. Takumi, relying on his wealthy father, often bullied Riku together with Yohei. He even took over the house that Riku used as a place to study and review his lessons. After that, Riku made up his mind to study hard, become a doctor, and escape from Takumi and Yohei forever. He often studied at a nearby restaurant. One day, he met Marina there while she was working part-time. Unlike everyone else, Marina never looked down on him. While the other students saw Riku as nothing more than a hopeless delinquent, Marina believed he was a kind-hearted person. She gave him a cup of ice cream. In return, he gave her a small stuffed doll. From that day on, Riku quietly fell in love with the gentle girl, but he had no idea that the two real monsters had witnessed everything. Soon afterward, they imprisoned Marina inside Riku's house. Day after day, they abused her without mercy. Then one day, Riku secretly returned to the house. Marina spotted him through the window. Believing he had come to save her, she excitedly leaned out the window, but she lost her balance and fell to her death. The two real killers then fell to their knees and begged him to take the blame. Takumi told him that since he was still a minor, he would only have to spend a few years in prison. He also promised that Riku's father's debts would be forgiven. On top of that, he offered Riku a large sum of money. The timid Riku chose to give in. He helped them bury Marina's body beneath that empty field, shovelful by shovelful. Riku accepted the role of the ringleader. He spent 3 years behind bars. Meanwhile, the two real murderers never spent a single day in prison. While in prison, Riku wrote a long letter to Inspector Isamu, intending to tell him the truth. But attorney Komori secretly intercepted the letter. Komori needed Takumi's family's hospital to treat his daughter. To protect his own job, he was willing to destroy an innocent man's chance to clear his name. After being released from prison, Riku discovered that the other two still felt no remorse whatsoever. That was the moment his heart finally gave up. He hated those two monsters, but even more than that, he hated himself for lacking the courage to protect the girl he loved most. so he decided to seek redemption in his own way. He would kill the two real murderers. Then he would stage himself as another victim. He would frame a police officer for everything. In the end, he would either find redemption through his plan or die along with it. The reason Riku hated Isamu so deeply could be traced back to the chaplain who often visited him in prison. The chaplain told Riku that Isamu had accepted a bribe from Takumi's father. That was why, after his release, Riku did everything he could to frame Isamu. After the case was over, Irina found a doll among Marina's belongings. It was the very doll Riku had given Marina years ago. Hajime brought the doll to the prison to visit Riku. Inside the doll was a recording of Marina's voice. Hajime pressed the play button. A recording of Marina's voice, made while she was being held captive, began to play. She said that she knew the house where she was being imprisoned belonged to Riku, but she was certain he had nothing to do with what had happened. It turned out Marina had already recorded the truth inside the doll. Even in her final moments, she was still thinking about the timid boy. At that moment, Riku could no longer hold back his tears. As he cried, he repeated "I'm sorry" over and over again. When an avalanche occurs, not a single snowflake is entirely innocent, yet not a single snowflake is willing to admit that it helped cause the avalanche. Riku's cowardice, Attorney Komori's selfishness, Takumi's arrogance, Yohei's cruelty. Every one of them was like a single snowflake. Each snowflake seemed too light to notice its own weight, but together, they became the avalanche that buried Marina.